Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by the good people at CACI. Not the pants, but the Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ant, God help us all. Here we go again. Once more to the breach, my friend. What's new and exciting in your world this week?
Well, the World Bank claims that the world GDP is $7 trillion more than what they thought it was.
This is going to be like one of them Pentagon things, isn't it?
I think people misread the article. In fact, I'm not quite sure the author was entirely clear. The author describes this. He says it's like finding money in the couch. We've got $7 trillion more than we had before.
What kind of couch do they have over there?
That's a pretty big couch.
Come on, man.
It's actually not that. It's more like you were getting on the scale every morning to weigh yourself, and you discovered that there was a problem with the scale. You're actually 10 pounds lighter than what you were. You didn't lose 10 pounds. The scale was just mismeasuring you. You're the same weight you were before. But so too here, and I think the difference, and this is the reason I bring this up, the difference is a little educational. What was happening is World Bank was calculating world GDP, that's world economic output. And of course, when you do this, you've got economic outputs of different countries measured in different currencies. They were using the exchange rate to convert one currency to another. So Mexican pesos are so many pesos to the dollar, so you do the conversion. We've measured Mexico's GDP in pesos, do the conversion using the exchange rate, and now you have Mexico's GDP in dollars. You add up that for all the countries, you got world GDP. Here's the problem. Exchange rates are, yes, a function of trade. If I buy something from Mexico and you buy something from Mexico, all of a sudden lots of people want to buy things from Mexico. It alters the exchange rate. And of course, that's relevant to the GDP, production of goods and services. But here's the kicker. Most of the transactions worldwide in foreign currencies are done for financial reasons, not for purchases of goods and services. So really, the exchange rate isn't only showing you exchange due to the different values of goods and services. It's showing you the exchange rate due to the different values of financial instruments. So how do you fix this? Well, one way to fix it is to use, instead of the exchange rate to convert your pesos to dollars, use what's called purchasing power parity. And that's a lot more difficult to calculate with the exchange rate. Anybody can just Google it and you have it there. Purchasing power parity requires that people actually go out into the field and figure out how much it costs to buy a McDonald's hamburger, for example, in Mexico versus the U.S., and based on this and based on what sorts of things Mexicans buy and what sorts of things Americans buy, you kind of figure out what is the value of a peso relative to the dollar when it comes to solely purchasing goods and services.
This is the idea behind the Big Mac Index.
Yes, it's very much the Big Mac Index. And what happens is, and I'll use China as an example because it's really telling, when you calculate China's GDP using exchange rates, you come to the conclusion that China's economy is 25% smaller than the U.S. economy. But when you calculate it using purchasing power parity, which is the way it should be calculated, you find that China's economy is 20% larger than the U.S. economy.
My intuition tells me that second thing is doubtlessly correct.
Yeah.
On a per capita basis, they're not doing as well as we are, I don't think, by a long shot, but there are quite a lot of them.
Yes. Yeah, on a per capita basis, China's GDP is on the order of like a tenth or a fifth of what ours is, much, much smaller. But in total, largely because there's so many people, their GDP is larger. So what's happened, the crux of the article is that World Bank has gone and recalculated GDPs for all the various countries using the correct measure, purchasing power parity, and came to the conclusion that world economic output is about $7 trillion more than what we thought it was.
So turns out that's probably right.
Yeah, and it kind of flies in the face of the people who keep saying that somehow we're worse off today than we were a generation ago. It makes no sense.
And I understand those people perfectly. They're idiots. Speaking of idiots, how about that for a segue, huh? It's almost like I went to comedy school. The Biden, now they're calling it the Biden-Harris administration. They're being much more, don't read too much into it, but They are being a touch more emphatic than they once. But see if you can find the difficulty with this here tweet that I found not too terribly long ago, which we'll leave in the show notes for. The Biden-Harris administration is lowering grocery costs by, you got to guess?
I was stuck at the Biden-Harris administration is lowering grocery costs.
Yeah, that's a load of, what's that technical term? Horse, given what I see every time I go to the grocery store. But be that as it may, the Biden-Harris administration is lowering grocery costs by partnering with 31 state attorneys general to take on price gouging.
Oh, my God. Wait a minute. Hang on.
Yeah, see, you've got it exactly right. It took you like half a second to get past the complete and total idiocy of that to land right on the idiocy of that.
The underlying idiocy. Price gouging. They're getting together with attorneys general to get after grocery stores for cutting their prices.
No, they want to force the grocery stores to cut their prices.
They want to force them to cut their prices.
Because that 3% margin that the grocery store is making
is just too damn high.
Somehow obscene to the commander-in-chief. I mean, it's the cheap, easy observation that young man is just confused.
Wow. If anyone would like an example, the Biden administration is putting pressure on banks not to charge high interest rates to high-risk borrowers. And what's happening is the banks, and this came out in the news banks are starting to announce that they're going to be ending free checking.
Well, and they're going to democratize that risk.
Well, yeah, there's the whole risk business, but the bottom line here is you can say to a company, all right, you stop charging so much, but the company's got to stay in business, so it's going to find some other way. Now, I guarantee you, James, if this comes to pass, the government successfully puts pressure on grocery stores to lower their prices, you will see coast to coast grocery chains adopting the Costco model, where yes, their prices are lower, but you've got to pay $150 a year to belong, to shop there at all. That's how they're going to make the money back.
And I'm here to tell you, the minute that happens, it's going to be racist.
Oh, yes, right.
I'm here to tell you. I want to take a giant step backward because I think we missed in our moment of being totally aghast by what this Jax is up to this week. Well, why did grocery prices get so high in the first place? Oh, yeah, it was actions undertaken by the federal government.
Right.
And now that same federal government, which everybody will say is a different federal government because we went from one party to the other party, that same federal government is pointing its fingers at the grocery stores saying it's your fault.
Yeah. One of the things that politicians are really good at is breaking your leg and then selling you crutches.
I don't think I've ever said this to you before. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, well, I'd love to take credit. That's not original to me. I've heard it before.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it was, appropriate.
Right.
And economists have trouble with that sometimes. And, look, I want to take a minute because people don't understand this, I don't think. You've been seeing the weather reports out of Tucson, Arizona, yes?
No, I haven't. But here in Washington, D.C., we're hitting 100 regularly.
Kiss my ass. It's 111 degrees here today. Of course, we don't have any humidity.
Exactly. So it's the humidity.
It's not the heat, it's the stupidity. Nonetheless, we do have humidity now because this is what's known as monsoon season here where literally out of the clear blue sky, a torrential downpour will happen, complete with thunder and lightning. We had a tornado last week, for God's sake. What the hell's going on? But when we get monsoon and it's 111 degrees and humid, that's when the flies are born. When I say flies, I mean flies plural. And they are everywhere. And it occurred to me today, as I walked through my back, can I call it a yard? There's no grass. Can it be a yard? We'll leave that to brighter minds than ours. But as I'm walking through what passes as a backyard, killing those flies wholesale, I don't think anything in the world has ever worked nearly as well as a fly swatter. I don't know why it is that I can roll up a magazine and miss, roll up a newspaper and miss, swing with a 2-liter bottle of soda and miss, go after them with my hands and miss. But a 49-cent piece of plastic on the end of a piece of aluminum, I'm like Vlad the Impaler killing flies in my backyard. It's really a wonder. I just want to sing the praises of whoever decided to make a fly swatter, because that was a genius. Now, I did just say genius, and I am today the master of segue, which can only mean it's time for the foolishness of the week. And, you know, Ant, I don't like people who wear kilts very much.
Now, we both have a good friend who loves to wear kilts.
I know, and he should stop it. And everybody should stop it, but nonetheless, I don't like kilt wearers, and you know only too well that I'm not too fond of economists either. But when a guy on Twitter called the Kilted Economist sent me a message the other day and said, "Hey, James, I can't help but think this is the foolishness of the week," I took one look at his handle and I went, doubtful. Very, very doubtful. Until I opened the thing, and I got to say, the Kilted Economist is right up on top of things. Because the state of Tennessee has told a U.S. Navy veteran when he went to get his driver's license renewed that they've decided he's not an American citizen and can't have a driver's license.
Hang on. The state of Tennessee decided. This is not the federal government.
Yeah, state of Tennessee.
Does the state of Tennessee have any say in whether anyone is a U.S. citizen?
Well, no, not really. And I'll point out that southern states caused a bit of a problem with this once upon a time, which gave us a few amendments to the Constitution, citizenship included in them. But they are the issuing authority for driver's licenses. And this poor bastard, 77 years old, wanders into the DMV there in Tennessee and says, "I need to get a new license." And they said, "Yeah, no, because, get this, he was born in Canada." That's right. You're absolutely right. But let me just kind of fill in the blanks for everybody. He was born in Canada of 2 American citizens, which makes him, say it with me, people, an American citizen. And then he went into the Army, and upon discharge, there's a little box on the discharge papers, "is an American citizen," which was checked off, which he brought to the DMV with him and showed the people at the DMV. And they said, "Yeah, we don't believe that. We're not accepting that. You're not an American. No driver's license for you."
Wow.
Yeah, it's really astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm blown away on so many counts here.
Usually the foolishness of the week, we look to, one fearless leader or another. But God, those imbeciles in Tennessee are really outdoing themselves with this.
I could see the DMV saying, "Look, you're not a resident of Tennessee. Therefore, you don't get a license."
He has been for like 50 years. He brought in his old Tennessee driver's license.
Yeah, and what do you do about people with green cards? They can get licenses, right?
Yes, they can.
Astounding. For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers. Mikhail Razner joins us this week. Mikhail is president of Mir United, a transport brokerage company. We invited him to Words and Numbers to give us an insider's view of what's going on with supply chain problems. Mikhail is a particularly special guest in that he's a long-term fan of Words and Numbers and a former student of mine at Duquesne University.
Mikhail, welcome back. I don't know how or when this happened, but we're actually getting requests from all of the great Words and Numbers listeners to, quote, bring back that supply chain guy. You don't have a name, but you have a following.
This is good. This is good.
You would expect, a musician or even Clark Neely, a constitutional lawyer, to have a fan base, but the supply chain guy?
Which I should add, I am a fan of Clark, a huge fan of Clark.
Who's not? Clark's great. You're great too. But did you ever think that supply chains would be sexy enough that you would be giving a command performance on a podcast as big and gigantic and as wonderful as ours?
I was flattered that you were welcoming the first time. The fact that I was invited a second time, let alone a third.
We actually even remembered your name all by ourselves. It's kind of astonishing. But
thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
And Mikhail, I got to tell you, we didn't get one request. We got
This was multiple requests.
I'm genuinely flattered. This is something that is super cool to me. I love that. One, as you guys know, obviously, big fan of Words and Numbers for many years. Dr. Davies, you know how much I admire you, and James, you know how much I've come to admire you over these episodes. And
this is just a load of horse. It gets bigger and bigger each time you swing that shovel, buddy. Come on. Come on.
No, man, I listen, like, you guys are amazing, and what you've done is incredible. As you can probably imagine, I don't keep in touch with many of my former professors, nor do I get a chance to speak to somebody I listen to weekly. So this is truly, like, it's amazing to me. So I love it.
I mean, look, man, on behalf of all of the wankers, that's what we call the listeners of Words and Numbers. They are all known as wankers. On behalf of the wankers out there, what the hell is up with those supply chains?
Yeah. So if you recall our initial conversation about 2 years ago, we were talking about, hey, this is getting really hairy and we're far from the end. And then things started to turn and we thought, oh, this looks like a natural rebound, as it typically would be. And in that time, we had an opportunity to have our second episode where we got a chance to really observe some of the downflow of the trucking market. And it really did occur to a significant portion. But now what you're really observing, and I think something that's cooler than, well, maybe not so cool for some people, but what I find is cool within the data point is we're now observing a rebound due to phenomenon that obviously was unforeseen in the first place, further unforeseen now because it's not an exacerbation of like a COVID incident. We're now talking full-blown wars affecting shipping containers, which I've got a really cool example of something specifically around the economics of and why that is. But something I've observed more so, and especially recently, and I think it's a driving variable for what's really picked up the volatility within the supply chain, is something that some people that I've talked to about this is called funny money. To elaborate on that a little bit more, we see fintech everywhere. People are making financial technology, AI that sort of simulates along that line. But most people probably haven't heard much about transportation tech, or maybe they have. James, you said this is getting sexy, so maybe some people are looking at this.
I don't think they are. Nope.
Well, good. This will be news to them, I suppose. In the back scene, there's been a lot of hedge fund managers, private equity people that have come in and said, this can be scaled because they saw this boom or they saw an opportunity for major issues within supply. And so they said, hey, let's put a bunch of money in this. Let's develop a platform. Let's see if we can really launch this and create some revenue on it. And so you had companies like Convoy try this. Basically, like, we called it the app. They were the app in our industry. And they said, hey, we're going to dump billions. I mean, I think they ended up raising something like $3 billion. When they were all said and done, they completely went bankrupt. They spent every last dollar. And all that they had to show at the end of it was a series of lanes that kind of went back and forth and a little bit of technology, obviously, within the app. It ended up being purchased by another company named Flexport, which is going to do the exact same thing that Convoy did. And so what you had was this pricing boom. People spent whatever money they needed to, and especially on the renewable energy side. I mean, you saw solar panels everywhere, 2020. You're still seeing that lithium being moved now. But you saw this big boom, and pricing stopped to really matter. It was mostly, can you get the job done? And to an extent where it was literally, as long as you can get the job done, no requirements, no regulation, to do it and bill us, we're good. And then you saw the complete turnaround. You said, people started making notice that this is not okay. And I even mentioned this. I said, CFOs are going to see this in about 2 years. They're going to flip their lid. And essentially what happened, there's a huge tightening. And so the prices started to go down. As you would imagine with any labor population, that includes people that really do hands-on work, carriers, drivers. You saw the same phenomenon in the natural gas market when you had people that were working in the oil fields making $300,000, $400,000 a year that had never seen 50 grand in their first year ever. So the same exact boom, lifestyles rose, and non-maliciously bought more trucks, said, hey, I'm going to scale my operation. This is a great opportunity. And in that time frame, what ended up happening was that tightening squeezed so many carriers, both internationally and domestically, that What we're seeing now is this over tightening here, and we haven't experienced this quite yet, but that price is going to rise domestically as well. And what you're seeing on the international side is just pro-cyclical to what's coming here. On the international side, what we're seeing is a big division of supply chain. We talked about this in our initial conversation. When we said supply chain is no longer the game of who can go the longest. It's now become the game of who can be the more efficient shipper, who can find some loopholes within taxation, who can get around tariffs, because as we probably saw, it won't matter if it's Biden or Trump. They both are anti-China. Biden's talking about 44.5% tariffs on steel, 25% tariffs on machinery. I mean, it's putting people in tough positions that are trying to manufacture.
One of the very interesting things that you introduced to me, I think it was you who I heard it from first, and to our audience, was the cost of last mile.
Yeah.
I mean, that was really quite a revelation.
Oh, yeah.
What's happening now relative to the last 3 years with last mile costs?
They are no longer, but about 2 months ago, they were as low as they could go. And the reason I think it's starting to really creep up now is because I think collectively, drivers have seen a longer down market than it was up when it was COVID. And so now people are really going out of business. Like, it's not like you're hearing about carriers going out of business. It's, hey, Bob that had the warehouse parking spot next to me is no longer here because he can't make ends meet. And so now we're in a really tough spot. Carriers are starting to notice this, and I think collectively are asking for more, which is normal. This swing happens. But the boom that I foresee coming around Q4 to Q1, I think the big companies and the big box stores are still going to keep prices at fairly even bay for another quarter over holidays. But I think come Q1, a lot of this is really going to hit the fan, and we're going to be in for a little bit of an awakening as to what prices are going to be doing beyond the current inflation numbers, which is really scary for some.
So just to recap, you're predicting round about Q1 or so, significant increase in retail prices driven by the increase in shipping costs.
I think that might come a little bit later, maybe Q3, Q4, depending on how long it requires for the markets to start recognizing that. But by Q1, you're going to start seeing, because RFPs translation typically come out in the fall. And so companies will get a chance to rebid. And that's when carriers are going to say, okay, this is our chance. We've been taking hits for 3 years. It's time to make up for some of that. And so I think you're going to see about a 6-month lull. And then at that point, companies are going to start having quarterly calls with their board saying, hey, we can't keep the shelf price at this.
And I'm guessing you've got a lot of domestic questions. I'm going to break the other way today. So why don't you have at it for...
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on recession. And I mean, of course, I'm an economist, right? And when people go and ask economists, and whenever people ask me about recession, I say you need to be talking to people like Mikhail because you're at the tip edge of the economy there. Whenever anything changes, you feel it first. What are your thoughts on recession? I know there have been polls. There have been polls of American consumers where the consumers say we're in recession now, and none of the numbers look like that. But it worries me that might be a prelude to something coming in Q4, Q1. What are your thoughts?
I really appreciate that question. It's so interesting that now we take polls to figure out if we're in a recession. I recall having answered that correctly on a test or two, but I guess we are where we are. Very interesting that you bring that up. And what I think is part of it, it's twofold. I think absolutely right. We do very much see that coming up front. And if you recall, in our first conversation, we said this money that's being spent, it's going to be realized. It's coming. This inflation's coming. Now we see, I think we even talked about this in our first episode. We said politicians are going to start pointing to transportation and big companies saying, you're gouging. And now we're here. Part of what we need to observe is more than a little bit of a pickup, because what we did see in these down markets was this really interesting phenomenon. After about 1.5 years, we started hitting off the bottom floor. It was like there'd be a week that was either really slow, really cheap, and then we'd have a few days that was great. And then it was back to just bad again. Just continue kind of on that rate for 6 months, 8 months, and that's really where we're at now. Now I'm starting to see this rise and this uptick, and it's been pretty consistent for give or take about 50 to 60 days. And that's where I've seen more optimism. Generally speaking, shippers are actually a little happier. We were in a 6-month point where some of my team was quite literally scared to call some of our shippers. They were so annoyed with this market. They were just so unpleasant. I mean, yeah, it got bad. Still is to some extent. There are some people that are some commodities are still in a really tough spot. Nurseries, of all things, the flowers. Florida had a great season, but what you see up north and typical, it's going to be, they suffered. So you're going to see a lot less small nursery companies for those that are into commodities like that. To sort of loop in what I said initially and seeing that rise in Q1, the primary reason for that is because I think when these markets swing, what ends up happening is either if the carriers have the bulk of the power, then you're seeing the shippers and the payers of freight start to collectively, not collude, that's a bad word for it, but kind of this togetherness of pushing those prices down. And you're seeing the reverse happen when the market starts to rebound back up. You're seeing carriers collectively asking for a little bit more. Part of it is these days we obviously have things like TikTok that actually get drivers around, and there's a lot of people that have developed a platform, and so people can actually hear this now. This is even 10, 15 years ago. Drivers they're smarter than I think a lot of people give them credit for. They see the markets in the way that they are, and they bid really, really well when the time is right. And so I think what's going to end up happening is as this RFP season comes up, and we'll see close to about $150 billion of freight being bid on just in that Q4. And I think that's what's going to be the most telling thing about how the economy, recessionary wise, is really going to turn. Because even if the prices rise, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get into a recession, as Dr. Davies said. Obviously, we all know. We know that what it could mean is potentially more jobs and just a generally more spending economy. And I think spending is not such a bad thing, regardless of kind of the state that we're in.
Hang on a sec. Before you say it again, tell everybody what RFP means.
Request for pricing. Sorry. Thank you.
I was about to say that you're clearly trained well as an economist, because when I asked you, are you expecting a recession, you didn't give an answer. But I hear you. It depends on Q4. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. A rise in the price of shipping doesn't tell you anything. The question is, why is it rising? If it's rising because of supply problems, well, yeah, that's recessionary. If it's rising because of demand, well, that's actually a good sign.
Absolutely. And here's the really interesting point. It's both. Let me give you an example.
He's a great economist.
I love it. No, this is cool. When I found this, and this is actually the route that I've been kind of moving into a little bit more within our company, you get to a certain point where you call enough manufacturers, you've had enough of the same process of doing business the way that I've been doing. Recently, I've gotten to meet some really cool people that are mostly on the front end of the project side of supply chain. And so I'm now seeing the commodity markets move. And I'm a little bit even further ahead on the supply chain to really see kind of what's going on. I mean, I'm sure people have heard of this, but are you familiar with boysenberries?
Yeah.
Boysenberries? Yeah, the berry?
They're delicious.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay, so met a gentleman. He's the one that brought this to light for me, specifically on this commodity. So do you all know where the best boysenberries come from?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say Maine.
Not a bad guess. I
would imagine, since we're discussing with an importer, that the answer is going to be something like Chile.
It's interesting. Most people think it's east. It's west. It's east. It's New Zealand.
New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Wow.
That's very close to Maine.
It's the Maine of the world, I guess, if you flip it upside down. Do you know what they use boysenberries for mostly in New Zealand?
No idea.
Feeding birds.
Right.
No, but yeah, no, of course, it's pie and it's syrup.
Absolutely. Now, do you all know who supplies the grain to make the pie to virtually everyone east of them?
Oh, yeah. It's got to be something like Iowa, right?
Ukraine.
Oh.
About that.
And so now...
This is going to dovetail quite nicely with my line of questioning.
Wow.
And so now what you're seeing is the people in New Zealand that buy these are mostly bakeries, and they can't fulfill the pie aspect. And so now you're starting to see some importers using this and buying containers worth to bring over to the US, because to your point, in part it's demand, but in part it's supply issue. And so now you're going to see a fluctuation price of boysenberries. So if there's a boysenberry ETF somewhere out there, may not be a bad couple bucks.
What I have learned from this brief conversation is that you and I really need to have a call every week about commodity price.
I think that would be very fun.
Because I can probably figure out how to make a living if I just got out in front of the markets a touch.
At this point, that's what I'm trying to convince some of these project managers and developers of. I tell them, look, I will do all the legwork for you for free, as long as you give me at least a firm handshake on you'll use me when the project goes through. And that's where I've really gotten an opportunity to observe some of these commodity trends and to figure out why it is that some of our prices, they'll just randomly fluctuate. And sometimes they'll just stay there. And sometimes they always stay there.
Sounds like you could use the services of a political economist. I'm just saying.
I think so. I think so.
James has a point, right? Because if I went into the store and saw the price of the boysenberry pie is up by 50 cents, it would never have occurred, and I'm an economist, it would never have occurred to me it's because of the war in Ukraine.
Well, look, Ant, I can tell you this. The people out there know that I am an enthusiastic user of pain medications. About 6 months ago, I couldn't get any. And it turns out it was because they were all going to Ukraine. You think about it for half a second. Of course they are.
Yep.
Where the hell else would you send them all? It's a war zone.
Yep.
And look, this gets us to a number of things, Mikhail, that I think you can probably shed some light on that other people are going to have a lot of trouble. So I want to just throw some things at you and see what you've got to say about them, if you don't mind. I don't mean to put you on the spot, and if it's not your bag, just say, nope, not that one, move on. Let me start by asking, and this is mostly for the benefit of our listeners, I can actually see you. We're always on a Zoom call because you don't want to be talking to somebody you can't see. And Mikhail, what are you, like 14?
Yeah, good for 14 going on 37, but yeah.
37, you look like a embryo, for God's sake. You've got that youthful glow that only men in Florida have.
James is jealous of your hair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Teeth too. But anyway, I digress. You probably don't really remember a world that wasn't defined by globalism, right? That's been the reality since you've been sentient. Ant and I are old enough to remember a bit before that happened, when things were very tense. And I've been predicting for a while, and I think you're seeing it now, that we're going to lose our globalism in favor of something that's going to start looking a whole lot more like regionalism. Our Chinese production is going to shift to Mexico. It's already started. It's just going to happen almost completely, right? And things in the East are going to stay in the East. Now, are you seeing evidence of this in the shipping world?
So much so that you can start calling Mexican factories in Ensenada, and if you don't speak Mandarin, they're not going to pick up the phone. It's like, no joke. I don't even mean that in any kind of facetiousness. They have many factories at this point already set up, operations going throughout. We saw that flip, Mexico becoming our number one imported country at this point over China. It's just China made in Mexico, especially down the Ensenada border, and you kind of come out west because obviously that's the closest for them. Already well put in.
That's fascinating if you think about it. That's a global shift.
Well, it is, because you started this conversation, James, and I pictured, well, of course, the Americans are going to open factories in Mexico. Not occurring to me, well, of course, Chinese are going to open factories in Mexico.
Yeah, we're going to buy stuff from factories in Mexico. We tend not to open them. Although there are counterexamples, right? Fender Guitars have been making instruments in Mexico for decades now. And very, very good ones. Matter of fact, I would say damn near indistinguishable from their American counterparts.
You're seeing a shift, not just of China. They're just steps ahead. It really is fascinating to see, of course, I very much root on America, and I love that, we have the proverbial we're so great kind of appeal. But it's so fascinating to see a country that really puts their cognitive minds behind some of their moves and you see what they're doing. I mean, this is just what's observable to me. And I really am front end. So to think what they must be doing otherwise. But besides them, there are already other, not just America as well, very much setting up bases down there. But something to consider, very important. Mexico, unlike America, is really difficult when it comes to opening a business. For us, it's, and I would say even we have certain restrictions that we with. For us, we could file for an LLC within 24 to 48 hours, not in Mexico. You're talking sometimes months because the government has to approve your business. Beyond that, you get a Mexican tariff VAT code. Everything you send in, you've got to learn the whole concept of how to apply VAT for both import and export. You need to prove that you can do that to the Mexican government before they issue you a business. And you can't import anything because you can't be an importer of record unless you can find a customs broker, a Mexican customs broker, because that's the only way to get something in that way, that is willing to be your face as a Chinese company to import on your behalf and take all the risk that could come along with that as a Mexican. And I mean, we know, well, maybe we don't. For example, like Mexico has, I believe it's something like 200% tariff on Chinese-made shoes. They don't want, and you're seeing it now. Now it's being made domestically. It's interesting.
I'm really rooting for the Mexicans. The demographics are such that they will be a global producer for generations, right? They've got a lot of young people, and it's a very young country. And they're becoming, year in and year out, a very well-educated workforce.
Mm-hmm.
The people here who scream and holler about keeping all the Mexicans out, really, that's not going to be much of a problem moving forward.
I think I saw somewhere recently that they're predicted to be the number 4 or 5 economy come 2025 or 2026.
And, I'll just remind people that it was once inconceivable and ridiculous that Japan would ever make anything that anybody would want. And then a generation or two later, it was inconceivable that anything desirable would ever come out of China.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Take a look at Mexico because that's what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting stuff, but I want to go a step further, right? Because if we're going to think geopolitically, and I'm going to look for evidence for certain things in the shipping lines, which I think is the absolute perfect place to start whenever you're thinking about geopolitics, right? What are the goods and services and how are they moving? And I've got, 3 places, well, 2.5 places that are on everybody's mind. Maybe it should be 3, but it's at least. And I'm thinking about Israel, where there's a shooting war. I'm thinking about Ukraine, where there's a much bigger shooting war that threatens to spill over into NATO Poland. And then I want to think about what the Houthis are doing to shipping lane, the Iran-backed Houthis who will fire upon any ship that they feel like firing. What lessons do you take? What intelligence can you give us coming out of these 3 places, if you can even look to all 3?
That is a perfectly phrased question. We obviously went over the Ukraine aspect, and grain may be silly when we talk about boysenberry pie, but it's certainly not silly when you talk about bread for a front line. That's where that's going. And we also know that some of these commodities that come out of grain are really low cost, easy to make, truly feed low-income countries in places that we couldn't otherwise. And so you're going to see major impacts due to that war have unintended consequences for much, much longer than just the war itself. God knows how long that's going to last. On the Israeli side, which I'd almost say is it's exacerbating the Houthis. And we're seeing this live, which is absolutely monumental. The lesson that I would take is, well, if we follow the trends, the Houthis didn't all just kind of show up and say, hey, this is it. What it actually was originally exacerbated by was the Evergreen Ship Company refusing to pay the fine of a country totally not associated with it, but they took significant offense. And so you started seeing, consider them terrorists per se, but you're starting to seeing extremists move more and more in those borders near that Suez Canal, where they're able to get in front of these ships. And this is not a major operation. So to think, how are they able to influence the price of something so much so that some of these steamship companies are just avoiding the canal entirely? What it's doing further is it's dividing that supply chain even further. And unfortunately, similar to how we talked about in our initial conversation, seeing that supply chain rift, both sides don't have an incentive to stop either war for several reasons. But on the shipping side, steamship lines are making more money. They can now go ask for more. The ports are going to be making more money. And as we've learned, the American ports are not owned by America. The vast majority of it is not. And the big companies out there, well, they know, okay, right now, yeah, it's a lot. But so now we're going to need to find something that's a little bit more, like you said, regionalism. And so they can now push and they can side with well, we don't make it domestic, but we make it here. It's North American, that sort of thing. And so there's a large incentive to just say, let them work it out. Let them keep firing upon it. And let's figure out how we're going to continue separating the supply chain further.
Would you say that these things irritate you on a daily or weekly basis? Are these realities that you have to deal with?
Yeah, unfortunately. And a perfect example of this, as far as irritation goes, is I have a client. They fabricate certain goods for the government. That's about as much as I can intelligently say about what they do anyway. But to get their goods, they have to procure it in a really niche fashion. And when they find it, it's go. You go extract that, you get it on a ship right away. We can't air freight it, obviously, but we can do the next best thing, which is expedite first mile, expedite last mile, and get that thing on the ship right away. For the past, we'll say 9 weeks, 10 weeks, we have seen GRIs, general rate increase, that have come from these steamship lines in the multi-thousands of dollars per container. So I know we saw the article, you and I discussed it briefly, Dr. Davies, there, and when you sent that over. And I know what you saw in that article, but that price has since already went. I've been on a project about a year ago with the forethought of, hey, this is probably going to go up. How much, I'm not sure, but at the time, we were able to get something of the ballpark of about $1,800, $2,000 for a Chinese container, door to door, to where we were going, which was roundabout Houston, Dallas, in that range, right? Right now, it will be right about $14,000.
Whoa.
Holy sh!
And
wow.
That's going to go up about 7 days.
Let me ask a pointed question. What's the difference in your profit margin?
Good question. Sometimes not, because percentage-wise, we're going to do the same. Other times, it becomes tough because not all of our clients are able to keep up with these GRIs, and then it goes to zero because we can't do the work. And then we just have to cut it, and that's that. Now, if it's on the ship, just to be clear, if it's on the ship, they can't rise the price. Pay for that, and that's good. You're locked in once you've in-gated the container, gotten it to the... And that's the crazier thing. They do this every 2 weeks, and I've got to move, I'm trying to make to Turkey right now. And thankfully, we're not seeing quite the rise in exports as we are in imports. That's really where the prices are being tightened. And that's because the East only has that for us. That's all that they can do with how much leverage we have against them in certain areas. But I'm trying to move something to Turkey right now. Got a very nice gentleman that's doing the rigging portion of this. And he seems to be taking his time. And today I had to be like, hey, Robert, listen, I really can't keep going back and forth on this. We really got to get this thing out of there. If you need, I will send my men. We can do it. No big deal. We'll even leave the price with you because in about a week, that price is going to jump $1,200 is what I'm predicting. It is less for me to get the crew, I mean, literally sent out there on a truck with all the equipment that I need to rig this one machine, to get in a container and get it on the ocean.
I just want to make the point that, it's not like you've become Scrooge McDuck here. You're not raking in all the gold and jumping into it as if it were a swimming pool.
Correct.
Prices have gone up exponentially and your margins are about the same.
Yeah. We operate in we're going to get the job done at the right price, and we guarantee it. So the nice thing is upfront, my price is generally a little bit more than the next competitor, but I'll never change no matter what happens. Even if we have to take a loss, that's something I guarantee. And we do occasionally. But thankfully, my team has gotten so good at being able to predict the cost that we've been able to make it work, which really scares me for some of these projects. So now we need things to really shuffle together.
Sure. Well, you've started to predict a few things here, and I'm going to ask you to make the more macro style predictions. Where are we going? What is it that regular people need to be aware of, given your insight into the various markets you operate in?
Yeah. One of the moves that we really don't consider because it's not freight per se, but moving. There's been more moving going on over the last 3 years than I've ever seen. Any migrationally wise, internationally.
You mean like households?
Yeah. I mean, there's a company I could point to them out of my office window from here. That's right there. I mean, that's all they do. And there's 200 people that work in that office. I mean, it's incredible. But what we're seeing now is you're thinking about moving domestically, lock that price in. Do not go with a national carrier. Go with something local and domestic that does household moves. Get your prices down right now so that this doesn't jump for you. I wouldn't say go out and stock your fridges. Hoarding is silly. There's generally no reason for that. I don't know that we're going to necessarily see this major impact in prices on the average side, in the middle class and the upper class. But as we discussed in some of our previous conversations, the most affected are going to be the lower class, the people that are food insecure, because a container that has 40,000 pounds of food, it goes from 2,000 to 6,000 to 8,000, 10,000, is not a major difference for the three of us. If I need to go pay 20 more cents for my pasta at the grocery store, or even if it was $2 more, That's not going to be a significant effect to me, or even to upper middle class with multiple children.
Right.
But the people that are lower class, even individuals, even people, nowadays that are graduating and really struggling, I mean, to them, like, they're counting dollars. And so you're going to see what I think is already a very, I don't want to call them pessimists because that's insulting, a pessimistic generation, which is kind of the ones that are like just getting into college now and about to graduate, sort of that range. I just see a lot more of that trending because of this. And I see a little bit of negative. What I'm really hoping is that either we really kind of come together as a country in some way and figure out, I wouldn't say this is scalable, but there is so much to fix that really can at least work on the most food insecure commodities to help that delivery be the right way. If we need to raise prices on the delivery of a Porsche or a Cadillac or even a Honda, so be it,
What the hell kind of communist are you?
Terrible communist, It was all those, it was the classes with Dr. Davies and Mark Gillis that really changed all my minds there.
Pack of commies at Duquesne University. Pack of commies. Let me take a deep breath before I yell at you again. Do you sense that global supply chains are robust at this point, or are we dealing with a fragile ecosystem that could easily break again?
Yeah, unfortunately. And part of that is just because I think people don't realize it's a trade, and it's really run well by 5 to 10% of the people that are actually in the industry. I mean, there's so much handholding that goes on, and I really feel, I mean, inevitably, I'm talking, we're constantly on the phone with manufacturers, with shippers, with warehouses, and the amount of times that we just have to get to the right person, it's so much more so than not that, yeah, if a sizable group of these people decide to either leave or get promoted, we're going to see a struggles within this. And it goes to show, the Houthis can influence a market price like this. Think about how a small group of people can affect even domestic prices.
Now, how much of that problem you're describing is just inherent in the beast of I'm trying to move product from that country to this country, and how much of it is hurdles that governments have thrown in the way that, well, before I can move that out of that country, I need this paperwork or pay this tax or whatever it is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's a little bit of that, highbrow kind of mindset when it comes to it. One of the things that we're doing right now is actually we're moving something to Cuba, which is really fun. And obviously we know embargoes in the US and so on and so forth, but it's for a foundation and they're doing ocean research.
Are you moving things out of Cuba? I know you're moving things to Cuba.
Oh.
Let me rephrase. One of the most avid cigar smokers in the history of cigars is asking you if you're moving things out of Cuba.
You and I can talk offline about this. We'll figure out a way to make you happy. How about that?
Well, that's never happened once in my lifetime, so
Okay.
I'm due.
Okay.
Due.
Well,
and I've got no more questions. You?
No, Mikhail, this is just wonderful.
It's always fantastic having you on, Mikhail. It really is.
I understand how our fans keep asking for you.
Yeah, and they really have spoken. It was so pronounced that you should go tell your mother.
I will forward her this episode. I know she'll be proud. Genuinely, I mean, look, kind of joke around with one another, but I'm so serious when I say how flattered I am that you guys even have me on these episodes, and to know that your audience is interested in this topic is, you can sense this is my passion. So I love talking about it. And frankly, we could talk about this anytime you want, and I'm very open to it.
When you get off this call, go purchase the supplychainguy.com.
I should do that.
Need it.
you really should do that, actually.
I have a feeling.
And all I'll say on behalf of our listeners is there is absolutely no accounting for taste, as Antony and I have been proving for some years now.
I would say, as I listen to some of the people that you guys have on, I can see their taste. And then, I get an email from Ed. He says, "Hey, Mikhail, the audience is asking for you." I'm like, wow, really? No, truly.
Well,
I always like to just bring it back to, I love what you guys do. I'll never stop having my team listen to these on Wednesdays. I look forward to it every week. Yeah, it's
outstanding. Well, keep an eye on the markets and let us know when it's time to talk again.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Thanks, Mikhail.
Thank you, guys.
And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.